Coming up, ESPN has boosted Bama back to #1 for 2018, but it might be Iron Bowl rival Auburn, who has the most to boost about. SEC Country Live starts right now. I was so proud of myself. Like, half the time I don't even write something down for the what we call the cold open. Today I actually wrote something that I thought was pretty good, and I totally butchered it. It's going to be that kind of show, I guess. If you happen to still be watching after that disaster, we're certainly glad you're with us as SEC Country Live does start right now. That's the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. My name is Brandon Adams. We are busy here. Over the course of the next 60 minutes, we talk about everything happening in the SEC. A lot of this is recruiting related after a lot of SEC schools added elite talent yesterday. Yep. Some of this is preseason prognostication based, which is fun for me, maybe not quite as fun for you from time to time. And speaking of fun, some fun at the expense of Florida coach Dan Mullen before it's all said and done.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun last night getting on here talking to a bunch of you guys about Tennessee, Alabama, Auburn, all pickup commitments last night from Grayson. I thought that was an extremely cool evening. A lot of good commits flying around, and so a lot of people picked up extra players last night.
Before we get going, and we're going to have a lot of fun today, let me try this one more time. Coming up, ESPN has boosted Bama back to #1 for 2018, but it might be Iron Bowl rival Auburn that has the most to boast about today. That was a mouthful. I should have never written.
There's a boost and a boast in there.
That's a little too much for this fat, thick tongue to try to read. Let me just move on instead to our first and 10 here. Item #1 on the list of things making news around the SEC. How about Alabama leapfrogging Clemson once again in the latest iteration of the way too early top 25 from Mark Schleybaugh at ESPN. Now, I love all preseason top 25s. I sort of love way too early top 25s the most of all. Yep. But my favorite by a long shot is ESPN for one simple reason. I love the fact that ESPN changes it so much. They change theirs after signing day. They do one right at the very beginning of January. They change it post-spring. They'll change it later on in the summer as you head into camp. I love the fact they make changes. They've already changed #1 3 times. It was Alabama #1 for a while. It was Clemson that leapfrogged Alabama back to #1 after a few of the guys from the Tigers decided to stick around for their senior year. And coming off the spring practice here, it is Alabama now back on top of #1 at #1 again on top of Clemson. For the explanation, it's Mark Schleybaugh who's the writer here. I'll find you what Schleybaugh says here just for a moment. He says sophomore quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, who came off the bench to lead the Crimson Tide to a thrilling victory in the national championship game, barely broke a sweat during spring practice because of a fractured bone in his left hand, but all signs point to Tagovailoa being the guy this coming fall. And because of that, he thinks that Alabama is going to be the #1 team in the country. So Schleybaugh tells you it's Tua over Hurts as quarterback, even though Tua didn't play during the spring, and Tua Tagovailoa is going to make Alabama #1. How do you feel about that?
I do have to kind of chuckle about it because you're right. I mean, this thing keeps getting flipped back and forth. And from what I can gather, reading the Alabama and Clemson kind of articles right there on ESPN.com, it seems like they've moved Alabama back to #1 because the quarterback race is more settled at Alabama more than it is Clemson, which is an absolute laugh, right? Yeah. I mean, you didn't even see it to Tagovailoa in the spring, and yet you have Kelly Bryant against Trevor Lawrence over there at Clemson, and they're saying, boy, both of these guys could play. I think that's a similar story to what you're kind of seeing out of Tuscaloosa, and yep, you flip-flop these things. But that's what's fun about it. It's all kind of hearsay at this point in time. We're, what is it, May 2nd today, and that's just how the nature of
I think we got to be very careful here about one thing. Let's not be so quick to assume that because Tua Tagovailoa is way better than Jalen Hurts, he's therefore going to be way better than every other quarterback. I thought that Trent Dilfer, the quarterback analyst and the Elite 11 quarterback coach, I thought he embarrassed himself the other day on the Saturday Down South podcast when he said that he thought that Tua could go undefeated as a college quarterback and essentially win every football game 50-3. I'm not buying that. I do like Tua. People who watch this show every day will know that. I liked him last year, even when he wasn't slated to be the Alabama starter. Yep. But he's not the best quarterback in the country. Frankly, I'm not even so sure that he's better than Trevor Lawrence, the incoming freshman quarterback at Clemson, who I like a lot. In fact, based on what I believe I saw from Lawrence this spring and what I heard about him as a high school quarterback, I think that Lawrence may ultimately be better as a quarterback than Tua Tagovailoa. And if you're saying Bama over Clemson in 2018 because Tua better than Lawrence, I think that may be faulty logic.
It might be faulty logic, but I think that you saw, I think the reason he gets the edge here is because listen, how many times have we had people in the comment section, boy, it was just one half of football. Y'all are crowning this guy on one half of football. Well, you've seen the one half of football. Out of Tua Tagovailoa on the biggest stage against one of the best defenses in the country. You haven't seen that from Trevor Lawrence yet. All you've kind of seen is the high school snippets and what he did in the spring game over Clemson. So I'm still giving him that edge. I understand that Tua is probably not the best quarterback in the country, might not even be the best quarterback in the SEC, but right now, I don't know who it is. I think that he has all the ability and all the kind of tangible things you want in a quarterback and has the surrounding cast to kind of get to that level by the end of the year. I think if his numbers are outrageous, you would not put it beyond yourself to say maybe going into the 2019 season, he might be the best quarterback.
On Facebook, Dustin Washington says it's too early for a top 25, and that's why, sort of tongue-in-cheek, ESPN calls its version of this the way too early top 25, because obviously things are going to change, and opinions for the most part haven't had a chance to fully form here. But that's part of what we do on this show every day too, is kind of have some fun with this kind of stuff and start spitting out those opinions. And I think that Alabama, in terms of a national champion, is overvalued. As the best team in the SEC West, yeah, probably. As an incredibly formidable foe for a team like Georgia in the SEC championship game, almost for sure. But as some sort of even money favorite to win the national championship, and a guy like Tua Tagovailoa who's going to blaze through his competition, other teams at quarterback, I'm not buying that as of yet. I'm going to pump the brakes on that version of Alabama here. Even if it's way too early for some, I think I at least know that much.
Well, listen, as much Alabama as I have in me, and we got some, I got a lot of Alabama in me.
You can take the boy out of Alabama, but you can't take the Alabama out of the boy.
Exactly, and I think even as much Alabama as I have in me, it's tough for me to look and think anybody just runs the table in your first year as a starting quarterback. It's hard to do. I mean, I've mentioned this a million times in the show, and I'll pat myself on the back for this. 2009 national championship team in Alabama is the only one that's been undefeated. All the good things they've done, that's the only team that's running the table, and it is very hard to do. So to look at it and say, Tua's this and boy, they can win every game, it's just not going to happen. I hope it does, and as a Bama guy, you know that. I don't think I foresee that happening in the next couple of years.
Mike and Michelle Tankersley on Facebook says it's crazy to lose 17 players, including 12 drafted, and then have a preseason #1 team. Can't stand Alabama, but what a dynasty. The Tankersleys are Tennessee fans, I'm almost 100% sure, if I remember correctly. But that's some credit you have to give towards Alabama, and I'll join them and everybody else who says that. When you look at the performance of Alabama in the draft and now being preseason #1, it speaks for itself. But the Clemson team that got beaten up by Alabama a season ago won't be the same team that Alabama would play in the playoff this year. I think it's a lot easier to beat a Kelly Bryant-led Clemson team than it is a Trevor Lawrence-led Clemson team. I believe that Lawrence will be the quarterback for Clemson, especially by the end of the season. And I think that version of Clemson, much like the one that had Deshaun Watson, although Lawrence and Watson are very different quarterbacks, that Clemson team led by Lawrence is a lot harder to beat.
I'm going to push back against that.
Okay.
I'm just not sure. And I've said this a million times on the show. When you look at Nick Saban's track record, it's usually not the Trevor Lawrences that have given him troubles. Now, they've had some dynamic passers. I think that when you look at what Deshaun Watson was able to do, it was his legs. Much like you thought you were going to have problems with Kelly Bryant. Look at the legs. Look at the ability to move the pocket, the ability to pick up those first downs. The 3rd and 14s Deshaun Watson could pick up with his legs. Usually, Alabama's defense hasn't had trouble with guys like Trevor Lawrence. The guys that want to sit in the pocket, think they're going to gunsling all over the field, think they're going to go 4 wide and kind of air it out. Trevor Lawrence, if that matchup was to happen tomorrow, I'm not sure he has enough time to just sit back there and pick Bama apart.
James Perkins says, BA, you got to look at the history. And it's a long-ranging history for Alabama here, but in a short amount of time, Dabo Swinney is certainly creating his own share of history here.
He definitely is. Listen, I think that when you just listen to Nick Saban's words talking about Dabo Swinney, there's a ton of respect there because he understands how good of a coach he is. And it's not just from losing to him, it's also when you did beat him, how many yards of offense they were able to put up. And I think they've always gone into those games with good game plans. I just don't think last year was one of them. I think that Clemson was completely outmatched, where their defensive line should have been dominant against an Alabama offensive front that had really not hit their stride. Alabama's offensive line was the more dominant front, and Jalen Hurts ended up being the more dominant passer of the two. So I'm going to have to see the proof. We build up these freshmen all the time, and I'm not saying Trevor Lawrence is not going to be an all-time great, but I'm going to have to see that before I'm starting to crown Trevor Lawrence and saying he's going to go out and beat the Goliath that has become Alabama.
Well, what you're saying about Lawrence, Esteban Esteves is saying on YouTube, he says Tua is going to be a bust. Everyone's acting like this kid's a god. He hasn't even played a whole SEC schedule. Watch him struggle this year, and let's see if he's even still the starter. So that's Esteban Esteves on YouTube talking about some skepticism there for Tua Tagovailoa.
And I completely understand that. I really do. You guys know I'm skeptical of younger players. I'm skeptical of some of the things at the quarterback position. The thing I will say is that we talk about this quarterback position a ton. he's not going to be asked to do that much. It's going to come down to really, I think, 3 games next year that he's really going to be asked to kind of carry the load in a lot of these situations. We've talked about Alabama's schedule. It's not as formidable as it was when you had FSU at the beginning and you really felt really good about what was going on down at LSU. LSU is going to be a good team. I think that's one of the teams that Tua is going to have to win the game in. I think you're going to have him against Auburn. But most of the time, Tua himself is not going to be asked to carry the load. Damian Harris is coming back, 2-time 1,000-yard rusher. They've got a good offensive line. I think the Tua just has to win those games in late November and December.
One thing that Tua Tagovailoa will be asked to do if he's going to be the full season starter for Alabama is make some improvements in some key areas. Recently, Alabama coach Nick Saban told the SEC Network where it is he would like to see Tagovailoa get better.
Tua is just naturally instinctive as a passer, but I think the other parts of the game is something that he needs to grow and develop in. But he was just a freshman, and he probably didn't play as much as maybe I would have liked for him to play to be able to develop some of those skills. But that's going to be the key for him, is to gain a respect for taking care of the ball. And like a lot of guys that are really good passers, they think they can always make that throw. They think they can always get it in there, and that's good to a point, but you also got to be smart about when you take those chances.
That fearlessness from Tua is something I actually like about his game, and I'm guessing if we see more of that, I think it's probably
weird.
Good.
This is kind of where you and I flip-flop on the topic, right? Because I look at it and say, I'm telling you right now, if Tua tries some of the throws like you saw him do in kind of mop-up action, and even against Georgia, really, when he made some really questionable throws, you want to see one of those Nick Saban classic butt chewings coming to the sideline?
Yeah.
You're going to get those for Tua Tagovailoa this year. Trying to kind of plant some of those balls. Nick Saban understands the turnover battle is the biggest part of Alabama's game plan, has been for the last 10 years. You play into your defense's hand, you play ball control offense. Giving the ball to the other team is not going to play well for Saban.
Let's do item number 2 here in our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. In an event you saw broadcast live on our SEC Country video channels on Tuesday night, we're able to bring you coverage of 5-star linebacker Owen Pappoe and some of his Grayson High School teammates. Georgia high school football powerhouse make their college decisions. Pappoe thrilled fans of the Auburn Tigers when he said this.
Putting me in the position that I'm in today, I would like to thank my family for the endless support and love that they give me every day. I would like to thank all my teammates for pushing me every day in practice, making me become the player I am today. I would like to thank Big Coach John Watson. He's the one who really helped me get into football. He's helped me a lot more on my recruitment. He has a really big impact on my life. And I also like to thank Coach Jonathan Saints for helping develop me into the player I am today, pushing me as hard as I can ever since my freshman year. And without further ado, the next 3 or 4 years I will be attending.
So the custom fit Auburn jersey there, the Auburn hat to match. The family reveals their own Auburn shirts as well. You hear the shout of War Eagle there at the end from 5-star linebacker Owen Pappoe. And for an Auburn program that's done pretty well in recruiting, 16 4-star prospects from a year ago, it had been a little while since Auburn added that 5-star name. But doing that yesterday in a state that's been good to Auburn before, in the state of Georgia, hard to overstate just how significant this recruiting win was for Auburn.
Yeah, I don't think you can say it enough times talking about what Gus Malzahn and Auburn were able to pull off here. And it's not so much the talent. I mean, it's a huge part of the talent. It's also where they got the guy from. We mentioned Loganville, Georgia. Benjamin Walk was on the show last night, and I thought his words were extremely his words were a big deal to me. He's been covering Auburn recruiting for 3 years. He said, this is by far the biggest story I've covered as far as recruits committing to Auburn. This 5-star Owen Pappoe, a huge athlete, a great athlete, going to fit in right there as a middle linebacker in Auburn. But this recruiting win, you wonder if this doesn't start to snowball for Auburn. They're able to land a couple more. He's already said he's going to try to flip Wanya Morris from Tennessee. This could be the start of something. I think if you're an Auburn fan, that's what you're hoping for.
Yeah, we'll talk more about the Morris part of this a little bit later on, who does commit to Tennessee last night, one of Owen Pappoe's teammates. As we mentioned yesterday, it's the safety, Jalen Simpson from Frederick Academy, who's committed to Auburn. Deshaun Sheffield, one of Simpson's high school teammates, probably on his way here as well. It's been Ja'Kai Clark as of late. That's also a Grayson high school football player there who's joined the Auburn Tigers. And this is the point that I've made about Auburn in the past, in that there is a clear gap between Auburn and almost everyone else in the SEC when it comes to recruiting prowess here and adding talent. Now, even with Pappoe, Auburn is still not recruiting at the same caliber that Georgia is, and not recruiting at the same caliber that Alabama is. but out recruiting almost everybody else, and that does matter here. And if you want to make the Auburn-Alabama side-by-side comparison here, it has been a while since Auburn's been able to point to a big trophy on the wall and say that's bigger than what Alabama's bringing in. But for last night, we'll talk about Kevin Harris, the Alabama edition, later on in the show. But for last night, the biggest name belongs to Auburn here. So it's not just bragging rights for Auburn against Georgia taking a player from in-state, but it's bragging rights for Auburn against Alabama taking a much bigger recruiting priority than the guy that Alabama won with.
Yeah, this is a number 8 prospect in the country,
top 10 player in the country.
It's been a while, like we said, since Auburn can point to something and say that, and I think that's what that tells you the story of what Owen Popo is. And you brought it up at the start of this week. I mean, we talk about Saturday, Friday of last week. Auburn's 32nd in the country. They got 4 commitments. All of a sudden they get Jalen Simpson. All of a sudden they jump up to 25th in the country. All of a sudden they get Owen Popo. Now they're in the top 20 in the country. And I think Auburn had to have one of those runs. And you mentioned it last year, talking about Georgia, how, at this point last year there was a ton of guys committed elsewhere and they started to kind of get on that roll. Started guys flipping. Justin Fields jumps on board. And the names kind of go on. You wonder if Auburn can't pull that off this year. Can Auburn get on the board with some of these guys? Start to get the wins flooding in. Maybe pull off an early season victory against Washington. Start to get some of these guys to realize that Auburn's got good things going on. And like I said, I think that's what Auburn fans are really hoping for. A ton of 4-star recruits last year, 16 4-star recruits last year. Maybe some of these 5-star guys, you look at a guy like Clay Webb out of Central Alabama. Can they get guys like that to start to hop on board with them? I think that's a big question.
Jeremy Pettis, who's an Alabama fan in the Facebook comment section, says, so much for Georgia putting a fence around the state. There's no doubt about it. And y'all know, at least if you watch the show regularly, you know who I cheer for. Georgia's my favorite team. But for last night at least, Georgia took the L against Auburn on this one. Stacey Hyman, though, who's a Georgia fan, says it ain't over yet. Kirby is the flip master. A lot of flips a season ago for the 2018 recruiting cycle. I think that Georgia's going to stay hard on Owen Papo here. In fact, Papo himself told us last night on SEC Country Live, the Georgia coaches have already told him that. Yep. They weren't too worried about his Auburn commitment. They were going to keep recruiting him hard. So this is probably one still to watch here. It is, I guess, fair to say that, while it's a big win for Auburn, that Papo is a bit of an outlier in terms of his national ranking compared to the other guys that Auburn currently has. So there is going to be some work that Auburn has to do to try to maintain this commitment, I would say.
I agree. And it's like I said, I don't think this is a trend for Georgia. I think this is just one outlier to where when you look into Owen Popo's words last night, what did he say? Boy, I could really, my path to get on the field is more clear at Auburn. My family felt comfortable, but my path to get on the field is more clear at Auburn. They signed a bunch of linebackers at Georgia last year. So I think this is a little bit of an outlier when you want to look at it from a Georgia perspective. I don't think things are trending this direction. I just think this is one instance, and I mentioned this to you on today's show. Alabama has dealt with this where, you can't sell the early playing time as much, and people are recruiting against you in that aspect. People are going to start doing the same things to Georgia because they have a loaded roster.
I mentioned Gus Malzahn recruiting the rest of the SEC other than Alabama and Georgia. Bo Molinari, who's got the Texas A&M logo there as his Facebook profile pic, says, really? I thought that Jimbo Fisher was currently sitting at number 2 in the country. For 2019, that's certainly the case. But if you look at the recent track record of the last 5 years, the Malzahn recruiting work is going to outperform the Kevin Sumlin recruiting work at Texas A&M. Moving forward, I think that Jimbo Fisher is a major fixture in terms of the elite recruiting stories of the SEC, but Auburn's roster for 2018 is in better shape than what Texas A&M's is. A couple other points on this subject, though. James Perkins says Auburn doesn't develop the talent, though, as well as Alabama does. Michael Clyburn says nobody, as a similar point, nobody is better at making 4 stars into 3 stars on the field than Gus Malzahn. And you can point to maybe a lack of Auburn players currently dominating the NFL, especially at those linebacker positions. Georgia did just have a top 10 pick at the inside linebacker position, the same one that Owen Papo is going to play at the college level. But the recruiting work that Malzahn has done clearly speaks for itself, even if the NFL results of late have been lacking.
I think that Gus Malzahn, what he does is he understands what his targets are. He understands what makes his football teams good football teams, and he goes after those guys. I don't think that Gus Malzahn is not one of these guys that kids himself. I think you can look no further than what we talked about Dan Mullen taking the job down in Florida and going into Justin Fields' house and losing Matt Corral. I don't think Gus Malzahn would not have done that.
That's right.
He doesn't kid himself in terms of what he's trying to get, but consistently right around those top 10 classes. And we mentioned it, no 5 stars last year, but 16 4-stars. And that's okay with Gus Malzahn. He's turned guys like Jeff Holland into premier pass rushers, and he's turned a lot of these running backs into premier running backs. And I think that's big for his program to kind of look at it that way.
Matt Ballone says that Byron Cowart's a prime example here, a elite recruit from the class of, I think it was 2015, if I'm remembering correctly, for Cowart, who didn't work out, ended up transferring. I think the one thing you have to give Auburn maybe a little bit of credit for here is that, Travis Williams, the linebackers coach, it was his relationship with Papo that was instrumental for last night. But also Kevin Steele, who's only been at Auburn now for a couple of years. Will Muschamp, I think of as a good coach, but as an Auburn defensive coordinator, that wasn't really working. The defense before Muschamp got there also had its share of problems. But Kevin Steele, as the Auburn defensive coordinator, has been better at this job than any place has ever been. So let's judge the development of Auburn defensive players more going forward after they've had 3 or 4 years to work with Kevin Steele, as opposed to what was happening defensively for the program before he got there.
Well, listen, if you ask me as a football fan, and I'll speak on behalf of Auburn fans right now, which is not something I do that much, look at the product on the field. Look at the front seven you have on defense. Look away from the stars. Look what the product does on the field, because that's really what it's all about. Recruiting is big time in terms of developing players because you get more talent. But Auburn, listen, they're going to have a top 3, top 2, maybe number 1 front 7 on defense this year. I think that speaks for itself. I don't think you have to worry about the 5 stars or 4 stars. Look at what they're doing and look at the development they have with people on the roster. It doesn't always have to be the 5-star guy.
One more quick point here on this subject. Last night Owen Papo said on our SEC Country Live broadcast that one of the reasons why he chose Auburn were those back-to-back visits he took during the month of November when Auburn beat Georgia in Jordan-Hare Stadium and then beat Alabama in the Iron Bowl. The atmosphere created by Auburn fans for those 2 games was instrumental in Papo's decision. This is one that Auburn fans can somewhat pat themselves in the back for and say that they really made a contribution to a big-time recruiting win. If those stadiums aren't quite as loud, if the environment wasn't quite as fun, odds are Papo sticks with his initial choice, which was Georgia.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting to hear him say that, and I pointed that out to a couple of people I talk off air about football, because and this topic came up when Jeremy Pruitt called out Tennessee fans about the spring game. Hey, we've got to have you here. We've got to have this raucous environment. And there were not a ton of Tennessee fans, but you did talk to some Tennessee fans that are like, hey, we need the product on the field. It's cyclical, right? I mean, you have to have those crazy environments. You have to show the passion of the fan base. Wanya Morris was complimentary last night of the Tennessee fan base. Boy, I know the passion. I think Jeremy Pruitt's going to get it turned around. That passion from those fan bases is such a huge selling point for a lot of these recruits, and you see that start to play out in terms of what he's saying about Auburn.
Drew Stanley says, I was at the first Auburn-Georgia game. It was the loudest environment I've ever experienced. Drew, I felt the same way. I was at the game too, and I don't know if it was the loudest stadium I've ever been in, but it was certainly among the loudest stadiums. Stephen Early, though, to sort of get the zinger back in and says, good thing Papo didn't go to the UCF game. Yeah, probably not quite the same environment for the UCF game.
Fair enough.
All right, let's do item number 3 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And Ryan Young, who does a great job covering the Florida Gators for SEC Country, had a chance to travel up to Heard County High School in Georgia to speak with the high school coaches for incoming freshman Florida quarterback Emory Jones. And what Young found was maybe a little bit different than what he expected to hear. The coaches there at Heard County believe that there's maybe a misinterpretation going on of exactly what Jones is going to be at the college level. Let's let Ryan Young explain, as he said on the Florida podcast, courtesy of SEC Country.
This really caught my ear. Both his head coach and his offensive coordinator, unprompted, said, everyone keeps calling him a dual-threat quarterback. He's not a dual-threat quarterback. I said, what? They go, well, he's very athletic, but he's a pro-style pocket quarterback. He is best in the pocket, operating out of there. We would run him when we needed to, and he's certainly athletic and can make plays, and I'm sure that Florida's going to run him and use that. But I guess in their eyes, that title diminishes what they feel he is as a passer.
What do you make of that? That the high school coaches say, this is not a dual-threat quarterback, he's a drop-back passer. There's a tendency for me to say, well, hold on now. If he's not a dual-threat quarterback, then what's he doing at Florida? Because that's what Florida said specifically that it wanted here. How do you interpret what Ryan Young says he heard from the Heard County coaches?
I tend to feel exactly the same way you're talking about. Your coaches might think that. I'm not sure Emory Jones thinks that about himself. I'm sure Emory Jones would love to get the most out of his talents. And listen, it's okay to be multiple. We don't have to, we don't have to label the guy. He can sit back there and be in the pocket on some plays. He can roll out on some plays. He can run the ball on some plays. We don't have to label him a pocket passer or a dual threat guy. He's already in college. That's for recruiting, in my mind. That's for recruiting. Hey, this guy's pocket passer. This guy's dual threat. He signed on with Dan Mullen for a reason, though, and I think that's because he thinks Dan Mullen can get the most out of his abilities, and I expect Emory Jones to be a runner in college. I think that why not use that weapon if you have it? I understand what his coaches are trying to say. I understand they're trying to say, listen, all these questions about his accuracy, all these questions about his development as a passer, he's a great pocket passer. But if you're Emory Jones, let's use all your tools, especially if you're a Florida fan. Let's use all the tools here on the table.
On Facebook, Rick Keene says Mullen wouldn't have recruited him as hard if he were a true pocket passer, and that's true. Now, you want pocket packer. Boy, this is not a good day for me for talking. Words are very hard today. Words are apparently very hard. You want pocket passer accuracy, but you want that sort of dual threat mobility here. And I think that, in fairness, one of the things I think we both think we saw from him during the spring practice, what we heard from some of the people who saw those open practices down in Gainesville back in the month of March, is maybe that accuracy that didn't really travel with him from the high school level to the college level, because I think the definition of what counts as accurate at the 2A level of Georgia high school football and the SEC level of college football, the definition of accuracy probably really changes pretty fast.
It definitely changes, and I'll give you another angle to look at this from, because I thought, when I started really thinking into this high school coach's words, maybe he's right now about Emory Jones. Maybe the pocket passer kind of feeling about Emory Jones is the reason Emory Jones struggled from the get-go down at Florida. When you watch the films, the practices, and these guys that are writing, Zach Alberverdi writing about it, it's a rollout, right? It's flipping your hip. It's rolling out of the pocket. It's throwing on the run. It's being able to do kind of some of these bootleg plays. Maybe that's the reason he struggled off the bat down there at Florida. Maybe that's what Dan Mullen really is working on, is getting him to accept the fact that he is going to be a dual threat guy.
On Facebook, Quentin Flanders says what the coach meant was that he's a great passer who has the ability to run and escape, more like Dak Prescott than Lamar Jackson. At the risk of coming across unkind here, let's not compare him at all to Lamar Jackson or Dak Prescott or any quarterback of that magnitude yet. Prescott was the NFL Rookie of the Year. Lamar Jackson was a first-round draft pick. Right now, Emory Jones is running, to be kind, third string at Florida. Let's slow down with any kind of comparisons to any kind of elite NFL talent right now for a guy that's probably heading for a red shirt.
Well, and that's not as a knock on Emory Jones, right? That's not a knock on Emory Jones to say let's not compare him. I think it's unfair for Emory Jones to start to compare him to a guy like Lamar Jackson. And I bring this up all the time. Just because you think you might play like him doesn't mean you're actually saying he will be him. But I look at the style. I'm JT Barrett. Does that make sense? I'm kind of JT Barrett on what Emory Jones, what I think the trajectory.
That's also a pretty nice compliment to come his way, because Barrett was a winner at Ohio State. Won a lot.
He was definitely a winner at Ohio State, but we're not talking about first round draft selection. We're talking about a guy who position change. Maybe Terrell Pryor. I don't know. I think if I'm picking out somebody who I think Emory Jones would be very happy if he had their career, that's the kind of guy I'm pointing out right now. This, not these first-round quarterback type guys. I'm looking at guys that are very successful college players.
Tyler Mann on YouTube says, I'd compare him to Jordan Jefferson from LSU. I wonder how Florida fans feel about that comparison.
Probably don't feel very good about that.
Katie McCarty does bring up a fair point, though, in Emory Jones' case, though. Ohio State did want him. He was a commit to Ohio State. Alabama also kicked the tires on him a little bit, too. So those are programs that only recruit elite quarterbacks. Emory Jones was in the mix at both those schools, so that's certainly some sort of voucher for Emory Jones here, given the fact that he had at least very strong interest from Ohio State, if not curious interest from Alabama.
Yeah, listen, the fact of the matter is, with that, Alabama didn't sign a quarterback, so they would have loved to have a guy like Emory Jones slide into this class and be a part of this quarterback room. And listen, I think that Dan Mullen and Urban Meyer, when you talk about those two guys, I think they see him in very similar style of roles in both their offense, very similar style of offense. So that's why I bring up a guy like JT Barrett. I think that if you could really construct a career, that's what you're looking for.
So speaking of Emory Jones, we have the screen grab of Emory Jones, who's I guess now going to make a little bit of a change coming off his first spring, where he wore the double-digit number for the Gators. Emory now going to go single digits. He lets us know on Twitter, #CincoEra, #EJ5. You like 5 as a number for your quarterback there in Emory Jones?
5 is a slick number. It was what number was Chris Leak? Was he 5? He might have been 7, something like that. Yeah.
I think Danny Werfel was 7. Surely 7's retired. I don't know if Florida retires numbers.
I don't know.
But I think Werfel was 7. Surely that's retired.
Yeah, it might be. It might be retired. But I think either way, I think 5 is a good looking number on him. I think that's kind of Oh, what was he before? Was it 11?
I think it was 13 or something like that. What was
might
it,
have
13?
been
Is that
13.
right?
Yeah, something
We show this video of him all the time.
Yeah,
Right now
yeah,
we
yeah.
know
I
his
think
number.
5's a good number. Either way, I think 5 is
I
good.
think 5 looks better than the number he was wearing, so that's Emory Jones, and that's what Ryan Young says. Interesting reporting, by the way. If you're a Florida fan, you can read more of that at SECcountry.com. Let's move on, talk about the Tennessee Vols here for a moment, and a big pickup for Tennessee coach Jeremy Pruitt once again in Atlanta last night. Grayson High School, which is a football power in the state of Georgia. 4 guys committing all to big-time schools. One of them is the 4-star offensive lineman Wanye Morris, who said something that Tennessee fans are going to really like.
First off, I would like to thank God for putting me in this opportunity. You know, my mom, my family, all my supporters, and without further ado, University of Tennessee.
Slick suit. Got the pocket square, kind of like the I don't even know what you call those, you know, like the polka dot look there. That is a nice, clean looking suit for Wanye Morris.
I got to tell you, I'm so disappointed in us from last night. We're sitting here, and then you watched the show last night. It's all about the hat science. We're looking at stickers, which Bill's been. This guy's name's on the side of the Tennessee hat. Like, how did we not see this guy's name?
We had that on
no, 64.
For those of you who don't know, we actually showed all of this live on SEC Country Live, a very special SEC Country Live presentation last night. I don't think we could see the hat until it was revealed, right? We couldn't see the hat until it was revealed, could we?
I don't know. I
mean, it's right there on the side.
Yeah, when he put it on, I was sitting there going, "Well, duh! Like, how did we not have somebody on the ground saying this is Tennessee all the way?" But
I mean, you do notice it on the side there. We never saw that on camera. Now, maybe it got picked up by somebody else. We never saw that.
I guess you're right. We probably couldn't see that.
I think this is a huge pickup for Jeremy Pruitt in Tennessee, and I think it puts a lot of pressure on another first-year coach in the SEC East like Dan Mullen. I think that Pruitt's got some recruiting chops. He needed, and really, I mean, Tennessee needs players at every single position. So Wanye Morris is no more important than anybody else is. They just need sort of big 4-star names at every position. Morris is the guy that you can get right now. They impressed him with some recent visits up there. This is, I mean, boy, Tennessee needed this badly.
It's big, and I'll go and tell you, this is not only big from a perspective of, hey, this is a 4-star recruit. I mentioned last night, when you watch the guy's film, to me, this is a 5-star offensive tackle. I know what the rankings say. I know what the 247 composite is. Look at his base. Look at how much leg strength and upper body strength he has. Look how long his arms is. I mean, this guy can tie his shoes standing up. He's going to be a 5-star offensive lineman for me. This is a Trey Smith kind of caliber cornerstone of the class type guy. He's already started about recruiting. And I think his words really were big time. If you want to talk to Tennessee fans, what he was saying last night was, man, I could have gone to Auburn. I could have been a part of what they got going on down there, but I wanted to be a part of something special at Tennessee. I love Jeremy Pruitt. I love Will Friend. I love everything they have going on, and I wanted to be different. Those words could not be any more beautiful for a Tennessee
fan. On
fan.
Facebook, Robbie Eversole says he's volunteering to help build a program from the bottom. This is huge for Pruitt. Can't wait to see Alabama. He's saying all those nice things. Then at the end he says, can't wait to see Alabama sit him on his tail end. I'll deal with the second part of that in a minute. As far as the first part of that comment from Robbie Eversole, it is true. Last night on our broadcast, Wanye Morris did talk a lot about that. He's got no problem sort of blazing that trail for Tennessee. That roster's a long way away from being done. Just adding Wanye Morris alone, not going to change a whole lot, but he's okay with that. Obviously, Alabama fans still think they're going to have the confidence to be able to beat him. Morris did talk a little bit about Tennessee bringing something new to that third Saturday in October rivalry, but it's kind of cool to see Morris be okay with sort of charting a new course here for the Vols.
No, I think that what I said about Georgia earlier, where this is not a trend, I feel the same way about Auburn not landing Wanye Morris. I don't think it's a trend. I think these are outlier players that wanted to make a decision on their own, wanted to go places for their own reasons. It's not, hey, boy, we got these facilities or this national championship or this SEC championship. He decided that he loved the relationship with Jeremy Pruitt, and if you're a Tennessee fan, you've got to hope that Jeremy Pruitt can work this magic on a ton of other players. We've mentioned before, there's a ton of Tennessee offers out there. You go down to Mobile, you go to Birmingham, you go to Atlanta. Jeremy Pruitt has to continue to work this magic in order to work this program back to where it's nationally respectable. This is a step in that direction. That's what we were trying to say last night. This is one step, but it's a big step in that direction.
Greg Steele says he's going to change his mind after the dreadful season that's going to be upcoming for Tennessee this year. And I guess I will admit that it's going to be an interesting battle here for Tennessee going forward in terms of being able to keep Morris, because last night on the heels of five-star linebacker Owen Pappoe choosing Auburn, he said the first recruit he's going to work hard on is going to be Wanya Morris, and those are carefully chosen words for a guy in Morris whose second-place school was Auburn, and Morris himself admitted on social media many times he was ready for recruitment to be over. He was torn between his decision. It sounds like Auburn was close with him a bunch. If you're a Tennessee fan, the one thing you do worry about here is for a school that already had a bit of a pull for him, does his high school teammate Owen Pappoe being there, along with another high school teammate, Ja'Kai Clark, does that now provide the anchor to move Morris eventually off that Tennessee commit towards Auburn?
It could, and I definitely think that's a possibility, but I think if you're a Tennessee fan and you're celebrating a victory, I look at the fact that Owen Pappoe had a Tennessee hat on the table as well, right? This could work two ways when you look at really trying to pull a guy. Owen Pappoe felt good enough about Tennessee and Jeremy Pruitt. He had a Tennessee hat sitting up there as well, so I wonder if both these directions are not coming into play here where maybe you do see some shifting. Maybe these two guys, when it comes down to the fall, are taking their official visits together instead of separate. And I think that could end up playing a part in the end.
John Brown says he is a great commit, going to make Tennessee special. It may take a few years, but domination is building. Certainly on the heels of finding out that Trey Smith's health is uncertain and missing out on Cade Mays, the class of 2018, a Wanya Morris addition for the class of 2019 is a reason for Vols fans to smile here. Item number 5 on our SEC Country Life First and 10 list. We talked a couple of days ago about what Clemson coach Dabo Swinney said about one-time rival for the Tigers program, Georgia. Two programs that played every year seemingly during the 80s and had some classic battles. They played a couple times since Dabo Swinney's been head coach at Clemson, and Dabo has said that he wants to see more of it. Well, the Athens Banner-Herald caught up with Georgia Athletic Director Greg McGarity on that subject. Hearing that Dabo wants to play Clemson, does Georgia want to renew that rivalry as well? Well, McGarity told the Athens Banner-Herald, I do think down the road you're going to see Clemson and Georgia playing each other. I'm not sure about the frequency of it, but I do think you'll see us play each other in the not-too-distant future. I'm a Georgia fan. I take McGarity's words here as good news. I think that Georgia and Clemson ought to play more. I've said before that if I was the king of Georgia scheduling, I'd drop Georgia Tech, I'd add Clemson every single year, and then I'd still play the Notre Dame style games that Georgia's going to play again in 2019. I just think that's a better schedule. I think it's the direction that college football is moving. I think two schools that are only separated by about a 90-minute drive ought to play a lot more than they do. This was great during the 80s. Dabo wants to do it. McGarity wants to do it. That to me sounds like great news.
You know, I have reservations about it. I really do. I look, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, and I've kind of thought about it sometimes between now and then. First of all, the Georgia Tech thing for me is a special rivalry. I understand that Clemson's down the road, Georgia Tech's down the road too, and I hate this thought. For me, just a personal decision, I don't know if I'm with the kind of flavor of the week scheduling. You know what I mean? Like Clemson's good now, Georgia's very good now. Both are in the same ballpark. Because Georgia Tech's not good right now, I don't know if the kind of flavor of the week thing makes me want to.
And we should clarify here, I am the only one talking about replacing Clemson with Georgia Tech. That's not an actual talking point for decision makers. I'm just saying if I was in control, that's what I would do.
Absolutely, and that's kind of what I'm addressing right now. The other thing for me is I'm a huge proponent of a 9-game conference schedule. I can't say it enough. The SEC's got to move to a 9-game conference schedule. It's ridiculous to me that Alabama and Georgia play twice in a 10-year span, or whatever it is, 8-year span. I mean, I think that's absolutely ridiculous. Let's go to a 9-game schedule, get rid of one of these, basically Division II games that some of these teams are playing over the year. Alabama's as guilty of as anybody, so is Georgia, so is everybody else in the SEC. Get rid of one of them, load up another SEC team, let's get the 9-game schedule rolling. So with that all in mind, do you really want to add Clemson at the beginning or at the end of the year every year? That makes it become a little more shaky to me.
Over on YouTube, Bulldog Trucker says you can't drop Tech. Some decisions, I should say some traditions deserve to live on. Old Brandt says you should keep Tech on the schedule, play Clemson, just drop an FCS cupcake. And I think eventually some of that stuff is going to happen, but the future of scheduling, I agree with you on the idea of a 9-game conference schedule. I like that. Maybe the SEC is going to be slow on that because it doesn't want a competitive disadvantage with other leagues. That's probably worth debating. But the future of this kind of scheduling is like Alabama's going to do a decade from now when it goes home and home with Notre Dame. This thing where you go into someone else's stadium, you invite them back to your stadium. It's better for recruiting because you get a chance to host recruits in your own stadium. Campuses is what sell recruits. Campus visits, just like Owen Pappoe said to us last night. That's what works with recruiting. This is the future. Whether it's traveling across the country to play Notre Dame or driving up the road and playing Clemson, home and home games like this is what the future of college scheduling is going to be.
I agree, and I think that there's room for both of these, right? I think you can schedule Georgia Tech, and every now and then you can schedule the Georgia Clemson game. The way Clemson and Auburn have been doing, the way Clemson's going to College Station to play Texas A&M this year, I'm fine with that. I just think that replacing a Georgia Tech and playing Clemson every single year is one of those things I'd not be on board with. Now, I don't think that's what Greg McGarity's talking about. I think Greg McGarity's saying, hey, let's get this thing scheduled. Let's talk, 2026 or 2025. And when that comes down, listen, nobody will be more on board with that than me. I think that'll be a special game to watch.
Bo Molinari says, how about some division realignment as well? If division realignment ever happened, if you want to make it more geographic, the only way to make it work is moving Alabama and Auburn both probably into the SEC East, which I'm fine with. I don't care. You're going to have to play these guys if you want to win a championship anyway. You might as well put them in the division that my favorite team plays in. But that's one of the real sticking points for division realignment is you got to take two pretty big behemoths and move them over to make the geography make sense.
And that kind of goes back to my original point, though, about I hate this reactionary kind of flavor of the week thing. I mean, listen, when I got to Alabama, you guys in the SEC East would have loved to play Alabama every year. You know what I mean?
That's a good point.
Like,
good
Florida would have been like, hey, please come on. Georgia would be like, hey, please come, Alabama, come over here. So I don't like the reactionary feeling of, boy, let's make them play every year. What goes around comes around. There's Tennessee dominated the Alabama rivalries for some time. LSU was beating up on Alabama for a while. There's teams, and it fluctuates. I do think you're right, though. Can't move one of them. You got to move both of them over to the other side of the conference if you're going to do one.
Well, speaking of the Alabama Crimson Tide, let's make them the subject of item number 6 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And this is an amazing stat. It comes to us via a writer from 24/7 Sports targeting just how successful Alabama has been in terms of putting its 5-star prospects into the NFL and in the first round of the draft. Take a look at this. This is an amazing number in terms of what Alabama's been able to do. Chris Hummer is the tweeter here who says, how good has Alabama been at developing these 5-star players? 48.3% of its 5-star players have been drafted in the first round. The rest of college football, it's just 17%, as he explains, based on the 24/7 Sports composite from the 2008 through 2015 who have declared for the NFL draft. About 50-50 of the, almost 50-50 of the 5 stars from Alabama, fewer than 20% of the rest of college football. It's a startling statistic.
I mean, absolutely startling. Honestly, when I read this, when I saw this graphic earlier today, I had to look at it 2 or 3 times in order to really understand what exactly that means. 17% as opposed to 48%. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And I think it's just, without looking like I have the crimson-colored glasses on right now, and if you're just a football fan and you might be an Auburn fan, think about that and how startling that actually is, that almost 50% of the 5 stars that signed there have gone in the first round. It's undeniably incredible.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, there's a part of me that wants to try to rack my brain to sort of come up with an explanation for it. Part of me wants to say, well, even in the category of 5 stars, there's some 5 stars who are probably better than others. Is Alabama just getting the highest of the, the 99th percentile of the 99th percentile? Are they getting the 5 stars of the 5 stars here?
Yeah.
Is that why more of these guys are panning out as first round draft picks? But the ratio in terms of comparing one to the other, it no doubt speaks for itself.
Yeah, and Kevin Blackman says in the Facebook comment section, because for years he recruited all the 5 stars. You've got the best players, that's what happens, and this is what's happening to you, Jen. Now, I don't know if that really, I don't know if that statement really lets you understand exactly what I'm talking about right here. The development is there to where the NFL coach, it's not about rolling over other colleges, right? It's not about having the 5-star players against the 4-star players. It's good enough development to where they're looking at the development and saying, that guy's better than all the other guys out there. And to move him in the first round, I can't say enough. And it's not me trying to be a Bama homer. That's an incredible stat. If that was any other team, I would still have my jaw on the floor in terms of what that actually stands for.
Well, listen, I think that the one advantage that there were schools that recruit the most elite talent, even if it's not all 5 stars, if it's 5 and 4-star players, the one thing they can do that other programs can is they can pit them against each other during practice. You go ones against ones, offense versus defense. Even with the drill reps, you're having to work a little extra harder because the guy that's doing them beside you is a pretty elite player here. It's not that hard to stand out on some practice fields at some SEC schools because the ratio of elite NFL-style talent just isn't that substantial. Right. But at a place like Alabama, practices are tougher because I mean, iron sharpens iron is like the worst football cliche of all, but there's a reason why every coach speaks about that all the time and why players say that too, because to a certain extent, iron, really tough, impressive football players really do sharpen each other.
Well, there's also this factor where both sides of this argument kind of feed each other, right? Is Nick Saban really developing guys this much? Yes, he is, but there's also the feeling from NFL scouts where you look at it and they trust Nick Saban, right? You look at it and say, boy, this guy's been really coached really well. We trust them enough to say, he understands the boundaries. He understands how to play within this defense. He understands how to do particular things that some other coaches just don't teach their players how to do. So it does kind of bounce off of each other and kind of revolve back and forth to where NFL coaches just trust kind of the talent evaluation coming out of there, too.
Well, let's do item number 7 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So WJOX is a very good sports radio station in Birmingham, Alabama. They talk a lot of college football every day, and recently they had on Brock Heward, who is a former quarterback at the University of Washington and a college football analyst for ESPN. And sort of strangely, Heward, even though he lives in the Pacific Northwest, is sort of always doing games down south.
Yep.
I don't really quite know how that tie-in seems to work, but he's doing games in the South all the time. Well, he was on WJOX because his school is Washington, because they are playing an in-state school in the state of Alabama, Auburn, in the opening week. He was asked to compare for that Week 1 game between Auburn and Washington. Who do you have as the better quarterback? Who has the edge here? Is it Stidham? Is it Browning? And Brock Heward goes with his alma mater. Take a listen.
I think I got to go Browning, just because of 3 years of starting experience, of a senior class. You've seen this at a few schools over the last few years, notably Georgia, in you guys' neck of the woods, where Sony Michel and Nick Chubb decided to come back to school. And the year before, it was up at Michigan State, where the quarterback and a couple D linemen come back to school. And out here, the left tackle, Trey Adams, the running back, Myles Gaskin, said, you know what, we've got some unfinished business. And Jake is going to be a fourth-year starter, a senior quarterback. There's a lot of seniors sprinkled throughout the D-line and linebackers and secondary and offensive line will have 3 to 4 senior starters. So I think because of that relationship with all of his teammates, I would give a slight advantage to Jake, but I do not welcome his opportunity to face that front seven at all.
So obviously, if you put these two quarterbacks side by side, handed this as a survey out to people who follow college football, plenty of people will take Browning over Stidham. I don't deny that. I'm not buying a word of this, though. I think Stidham is a better quarterback than Jake Browning. I think he outplays him in the Week 1 opener. As I've said many times before, Washington is not coming into SEC country, into Atlanta, and beating a top 10 SEC team in Atlanta. They are just not. I think Stidham outplays Browning on that day. I think he has a better season overall. I think Stidham's a better pro.
Well, I think Auburn fans are going to have to hope that Jarrett Stidham outplays Jake Browning, because I think that's the key to victory if you're an Auburn fan going to that game. And Brock Heward goes about this in kind of a weird way, doesn't it? It's like you're asked about the quarterback versus quarterback, but he ends up breaking down team versus team.
I understand, yeah.
He ends up breaking down, the left tackle and the running back and all these guys have kind of been there and they have unfinished business, and that's what really makes me think Jake Browning more. But I do read past what he kind of said there, because I think he meant that the entire body of work of Jake Browning's career. Listen, this is a guy in Browning who's thrown for 9,000 yards since he's been at Washington. Don't forget, too, that this is an incredibly well-coached football team under Chris Peters.
Yeah, they are.
They're a well-coached, very football-educated, oriented football team. And so, head up for me. I think that in the end, Stidham probably is the better quarterback. I tend to agree with you right now. But Jake Browning is very good in his own right, and he's not going to be – I think the reason I'm picking Stidham is what I'm trying to say is Browning's not going to be asked to do all the same things in an opener that Stidham's going to be asked.
All I'm saying is a couple of years ago, Washington came into Atlanta to play Alabama in the college football playoff. And yes, Alabama then is probably better than Auburn will be in 2018. I won't deny that. But Washington did not lift a finger that day. Yeah. The whole game was this controversy of, is Lane Kiffin going to run the ball? But what we sort of forgot was the entire time is Alabama's essentially steamrolling Washington, who was just sort of happy to be there. I think a similar result plays out in Week 1. And somebody in the comments section a moment ago says, well, what happened when UCF played Auburn in Atlanta? Playing a team like that at the end of the season when they have nothing to play for is a lot different than playing at the beginning of the season when you've got everything in the world to play for. It's a very different level of motivation for Auburn against Washington compared to UCF. And this Auburn team may even be better than that team was a year ago to top all that off. I will be shocked, blown away, if Browning outguns Jarrett Stidham, and certainly if Washington takes care of Auburn there in Week 1. I don't see that happening. I see that as being a big flag raised on behalf of the SEC. A lot of the people in our comment section don't like Auburn, but I think Auburn carries the banner for the SEC in that Week 1 game against Washington.
I just don't see it. Listen, it's like I said yesterday. I'd love nothing more than to think that Auburn just walks the dog on Washington. But Washington, to me, they're a better version of everything we've been saying about Mississippi State all offseason. Mississippi State could shock some people. Mississippi State's going to raise some eyebrows. Washington has the same thing going on, and they have a better coach, and they have probably better talent at some of these positions. And so you got a senior-laden offensive line. You got a senior, defensive line. You got a senior running back. You got a senior quarterback. You have guys that, and like Brock Heward said, these guys have played with each other some time. Like 19 returning starters out of the 22 on Washington's football team. Add in Chris Peterson as the head coach, and I'm just telling you, you say 2-touchdown game, 14 points. It's not going to be that easy. I understand what you're saying about getting the dog walked on you by Alabama a couple years ago. That was a couple of years ago, and that was Alabama, and I just don't see it playing out the same way.
Just don't let me into that bandwagon category on Mississippi State. That Mississippi State team lost to Auburn by 39 points a year ago.
Yeah.
So if you're saying, hey, that's a better version of Mississippi State, I've still got a 39-point cushion even in that regard.
I agree. I just think that all the focus on Mississippi State because they got this talent. They've got all these returners coming back. They've got the quarterback coming back. They've got the running back coming back. Washington has all the same things and might have better players. You know what I mean? Like they have all the same things plus a better coach right now anyways. In terms of what you're looking at and projecting this game. So I just think that Washington is going to be a very formidable opponent.
On Facebook, Rick Keene says, yeah, but BA, Auburn always finds a way to lose games like this. Go back to last year, though. Do you remember how we were, just hand-wringing over the fact that Auburn lost to Clemson in a game that Jarrett Stidham got sacked before the Auburn offensive line found itself? Got sacked like 11 times that day. They still lost to a college football playoff team and the defending national champion by a single touchdown on the road. I mean, that is part of what Rick Keene says in the comment section. I love Rick's comments, even though he's a Florida fan. I actually do like Rick. But that's an example of the sort of like disregard people have for Auburn in our comment section every single day. They went on the road to Clemson, who's been in the playoff 3 years in a row, lost on the road by a touchdown. Everybody's like, oh, Auburn's a bunch of choke artists. If you're playing that way with Clemson in its own stadium, what are you doing in a neutral site against Washington, a bunch of pillow fight guys from up in the Northwest?
I think you're going to be sadly mistaken, though, if you're labeling them as pillow fight guys. I just do. I think that they are much more formidable than a lot of people want to give them credit for. The pillow fight guys, Vita VA, what was he, 11th overall pick in the draft this past weekend out of Washington? They're much better than a lot of people realize, and they're very well coached, and that's what I'm just saying. The consistency out of Auburn, I think, is what a lot of people bring the attention to. When you point to the Clemson game, when you point to the LSU game, when you point to the UCF game, the consistency has to be there, and away from home, it just hasn't been the last couple of years. Yes, they're very good at home, and yes, they beat Georgia, and yes, they beat Alabama, and those are spectacular wins, and they deserve to have credit for it. But Washington, I think, in that Game 1 matchup is just going to be a tough matchup for them.
Jacob Mahaffey says Atlanta is Auburn's kryptonite. I guess what I'd say about that is look at the teams they're normally playing in Atlanta. They're normally playing teams like Georgia or somewhere along those lines. Those are tough opponents to play here. The UCF game, I don't have quite as much of an answer for. That wasn't a good moment of the program.
Yeah.
They had a bad fourth quarter against LSU, and with a depleted roster, they had a bad performance against UCF. Pretty much everything else for Auburn sort of speaks for itself.
Yeah, I agree with you to a point, and Gus Malzahn has been consistently inconsistent. That's what you could. He's risen up to a lot of these, games that has to be won. I'm not sitting here trying to knock on Auburn. Don't get me wrong. I think Auburn's a good football team, but I'm not dismissing Washington as an easy win for Auburn by any means. I just can't do it.
All right, let's do item number 8 here on our SEC Country Line 1st and 10 list. And more fallout continues from a Tennessee story that I'm sure a lot of folks in Knoxville would wish sort of went away here. Jimmy Hyams, who's a good reporter doing some radio there in the state of Tennessee and also covering the Vols for a long time, letting us know that someone else has now lost a job on the heels of Greg Schiano almost becoming Tennessee coach and then not. Jimmy Hyams tweets out breaking news. Sources, Tennessee Chancellor Beverly Davenport's been fired by Dr. Joe DiPietro. She was hired December 15th, effective February 15th, made the controversial hire of John Curry as AD, then fired him December 1st and hired Philip Fulmer as AD. Does this end the story? Does this sort of cause it to bubble back up again? As I said, Tennessee went through a nightmare with the Greg Schiano stuff. I thought Vols fans were right in regards to revolting against that hire. I thought that Curry's behavior during all this was just plain weird. Maybe you can say that Davenport's behavior was also weird too, and the fact that I don't really know what you criticize her for, allowing it to go on too long and then being in a position to fire an athletic director she just hired. Clearly, she cost the university a ton of money because it's millions of dollars they had to buy out Curry on. Now they're going to pay Philip Fulmer millions more. Maybe it's just mishandling of funds here. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I don't think it circles all the way back to just this. Remember, they've had issues at Tennessee and other sports and in other places that they had to have like that round table from the coaches last year. A lot of other things going on. If you're going to try to pin all this coaching stuff on Beverly Davenport, then I don't think it's a good move. Now, I do think that it's all this talk has to go away now, right? I mean, this is the end of it. You have literally cleared out everything at Tennessee in terms of what the debacle was in December. But I don't like pinning all this on Beverly Davenport. I think that, listen, Chancellor University has got a lot more to do with a lot of different things other than just the football program. So I think all of it coming together, I guess if you're a Tennessee fan, I guess you're happy. I guess this brings up a good look. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear from you guys.
Papa Doc 19 says Philip Fulmer strikes again here. I don't know if you can lay this one at the feet of Philip Fulmer, but what it does sort of turn into, though, is you ever go to like a factory or like some sort of plant and they have that sign on the wall that says it's been X number of days since our last workplace accident?
Yeah.
Tennessee, they have the sign that says it's been X number of days since our last scandal.
Right.
And for Tennessee, it's never too many days. ADs get fired there all the time, run out of town all the time. Now you're running out Beverly Davenport out of town. The number of days since Tennessee was sort of marred in controversy, it doesn't seem like we ever get too far down the road there.
Yeah, the number of days since an administrator was fired, something like that going on in this time. And I agree with you. I don't know really what this means in terms of the football program. I don't know what this means in terms of Tennessee fans having any pride in it. I think it just is what it is, and it's part of the fallout, and you just kind of keep moving on.
All right, item number 9 on our SEC Country Life First and 10 list. We talked earlier about some of that Grayson 4, Wanye Morris picking Tennessee, 5-star linebacker Owen Pappo picking Auburn. Well, Alabama was also the recipient of a big-time commitment yesterday from 4-star linebacker Kevin Harris, also from the Grayson Rams program there in Georgia. Here is the announcement that Harris made from a sports bar in Atlanta, right across the street from where the Atlanta Braves play. So very little pomp and circumstance from Kevin Harris. No hat show, a T-shirt, nice suit there, kind of a no-nonsense. What are you laughing at?
UL Brant in the comment section on YouTube said number of days since our last SEC victory.
There is also that countdown for Tennessee as well.
Wrong,
and maybe
been quite a long time.
Maybe Kevin Harris will contribute to some of that as well here as he chooses the Alabama Crimson Tide. This is a player for Alabama that you really like a lot.
Yeah, I think that he's polished, right? I mean, I made the mention yesterday. Owen Pappo, in his own right, is extremely gifted. I mean, his spark score, we've said it a million times, is through the roof. It's the best one they've ever had. I look at Wanye Morris. I think he's SEC ready to play offensive line. I think he's got the frame. I think he's got the length. I think he's got the build in order to do that. I look at the technique out of a guy like Kevin Harris, and it reminds me a lot of somebody that is ready to rush the passer. And I'm not saying he's going to come to Alabama and be a day one starter, but I think he, as a freshman, could be a very good piece in terms of the pass rush. He's got a good knee bend. He plays with good leverage. His hand action, we used to call it the windshield wipers. He's got these kind of hand things going on where he can get hands off of them.
See, back in the 80s, we called that wax on,
yeah, wax on, wax off.
So you know that movie? You know Karate Kid?
No, I don't know that. I learned that off like Ninja Turtles or something.
Okay, yeah, wax on, wax off.
Yeah, but anyway.
I love 80s movies.
But anyways, he's got the windshield wipers going on where he can get those hands off him and kind of get around the edge and skirt the edge. I think he's polished. I don't know body-wise. He's going to have to put on some weight, but I think he's very polished in his technique, and I think the weight will come when he gets under.
Michael, have you seen Karate Kid? I'm not talking about that terrible movie that Jaden Smith was in. I'm talking about the real Karate Kid.
I've never seen it.
Wax on, wax
so far
off.
out.
Real quick point on Kevin Harris. What's interesting to me about this is, for two programs that seemingly were going after the same recruits a lot in 2018, there is a real divergence in either scouting reports or something between Alabama and Georgia for 2019, because a player like Kevin Harris is not on Georgia's radar at all.
Yeah.
Alabama really wanted. The same with Rashad Chaney, a defensive lineman that was a Georgia commit that maybe Georgia had some second thoughts about, was a guy that Alabama scarfed up quickly. It is really interesting that Kirby Smart cut from the Nick Saban cloth. A lot of the same, recruits in 2018. In 2019, very different evaluations coming from.
I think it's all about needs too, right? I mean, it's all about needs. I think you understood that you had, a whole slew of pass rushers that got a ton of playing time last year with all the depth concerns. I mean, you were going 3 deep, kind of rushing the passer in particular points. they understand that those guys were coming back this year. They're going to be moving on after this year, and so you're going to have to find some more of those guys. I think it's just about needs for the program. You know, it's about what do you need at what certain times. I think you're always going to need and want a guy like Owen Popo. I think he's just a great generational talent. He's athletic. He fits in anywhere. But I think when you really dig deeper into it, Georgia's not really hard up for linebackers this time around. It's kind of like, hey, we have this guy in our backyard. We can try for him, but we don't really need linebackers. And so I think that's where you get the divergence. I think that you really have to look at positions that both of them need in order to really find that head-up matchup.
Item number 10 here in our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. You know, recruiting's been a big part of what we've done today, and obviously anytime a recruit chooses one school over another, there's always going to be some disappointed fans on one side of that equation. And one of the things we sort of joke about sometimes on the internet as college football fans, there's never a good time to tweet at a recruit.
Terrible.
You can be disappointed, you can be upset, but save that thought inside your head. Don't tweet at the recruit. Somebody who did not take that advice was sports personality Skip Bayless, who his alma mater is Vanderbilt, and truth is, I don't even know who this kid is. I guess it's a basketball player that chose Indiana over Vanderbilt.
He's from Indiana.
And Skip Bayless couldn't help himself. He says, hey, Romeo Langford, I respect and understand your decision to stay in state and play for Indiana, but you should have signed with the best school in the country, Vanderbilt, and joined a recruiting class that could have contended for a national championship. That is Skip Bayless there. For me, all of this is just one giant humble brag to remind people that he actually went to Vanderbilt, but don't tweet it.
Does that contend for a humble brag? Is that?
I think it's definitely a humble brag.
You know,
my alma mater, Vanderbilt. It's sort of like saying somebody, I went to school in Boston, Cambridge, Harvard. Like, there's a little bit of that going on there. That hey, don't forget I graduated from Vanderbilt.
Here's what I'll give Skip Bayless credit for. And by the way, I'm about to go on this crusade here in a second. Here's what I'll give Skip Bayless credit for. He didn't @tweet Romeo Langford, right? He didn't tag him in the tweet. Listen to me, people. Look in my eyes. Don't ever tweet at a recruit.
You just got to look in my eyes from Mike Johnson.
Don't ever tweet at a recruit. Don't @ the recruit. They don't need to hear from you. They got enough issues themselves. Don't @tweet recruits. Not a good look.
You just got to come close to the screen.
Bring it in, buddy.
Bring
it in. Don't do it. Don't do it. I'm just telling you, don't do it.
What y'all don't know is Mike's on his way to a vacation here. He's got a little time off coming up, or at least a day off coming up. So apparently a spry mood here with the day off. All of a sudden you're going to get
feeling good, man.
You're going to get the finger wag of a doom up here and get a little lecture.
I felt like that one needed to be hammered home a little bit more. You know what I'm saying? Don't @tweet recruits.
And I certainly appreciate that. All right, here on SEC Country Live, we're always looking to close the show the same way every day. And as I said, Mike won't be here tomorrow, but we'll still have a show. But before we wrap up this one, let's give you a champion of life. And yesterday we talked about the Chick-fil-A Challenge charity golf tournament that takes place every year, around the same time every year at Reynolds Plantation, which is there in Lake Oconee in Georgia. A lot of the coaches get together for a good cause. And during the golf event, one coach, Dabo Swinney, had some fun at the expense of Florida coach Dan Mullen. This is a great video, pretty funny. Take a look at this. You see Mullen going over. He's sneaking over.
Dabo.
I should say Dabo. He puts the ball there. You know that's going to come up later on. Here comes Mullen in his flip-flops, getting ready to hit.
I don't think he had the flip-flops.
Oh, he's got the golf shoes on there. But the exploding golf ball trick. How about Dabo coming up with the exploding golf ball trick there for Dan Mullen?
I love this, man.
It's well done.
I love it, man. It just shows you, to me, that shows you the fun and energy. And I think that's exactly why Dabo's been so good at recruiting. He's just a younger guy and has a lot of energy.
That's exactly right. And obviously, Florida fans hope that Mullen's career doesn't go up in smoke quite as quick, much like Jim McElwain's did before.
Gotta hope that that's not a sign of things to come.
Hey, thanks for being with us here today on SEC Country Live. Check out our podcast. The audio version of our show will be up on all the various podcast channels here pretty much immediately after the show is done. Mike won't be here tomorrow. I will be back, though. I'd love to see you here. Make sure you also share the show with your friends on Facebook and on YouTube and all the other video channels. Let them know we're talking about the SEC here each and every afternoon. Y'all have a great day. I'll see you back here tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern. Mike's going to be getting tan at the beach. We won't hold that against him too much. We'll talk to you tomorrow right here on SEC Country Live.